better than I could, having known him better than I knew him. I only knew him as a man who faithfully came to Mass, listening intently, praying quietly, and leaving with humility. The purpose of the Catholic funeral Mass is to pray for the deceased, to offer consolation to those who are present, and last but not least, to connect the life of Coach Kelly to the God who created and redeemed him. And being a humble, prayerful man, I think that this is precisely how he would have wanted it. Some of his friends and family members will be speaking about him after communion, so there's no need for me to needlessly repeat some of the things that they have to say. But that doesn't mean that I won't leave his personal and professional life unspoken, because it was indeed a life of service to his country, to his family, to his friends, and to the many that he coached, whether it was in swimming or just in lessons of life. And a life lived in service is a life that is worthy of the name of Christian. There are some who knew Coach not as just Coach, but as Lieutenant Colonel Edward Joseph Kelly. He served in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. He was a commanding officer in the former war and served as a battalion commander and a Special Forces commander. He served in both the infantry and airborne rangers. And of course, he served as a swimming coach for many hundreds of people. Several people, I'm to understand, that he coached still hold world records. And as far as I could count, he won at least 8 Coach of the Year awards, which is impressive, to say the least. And I'd be willing to bet that there are many people here, just from what I've heard, that would give him the Coach of a Lifetime award, if they could. And I'm not sure if there's a swim team in heaven, but if so, then he's probably been immediately drafted by the Heavenly Father. Coaching staff, of course. But since I can't really say enough about such things, I will keep comments about his life simple, because I think that that's what Coach would have wanted. His service didn't just stop with coaching. The dollar amount in scholarships that Coach Kelly helped to earn for his swimmers so that they could go to college numbered possibly in the millions. This was a man who understood that coaching is not just about winning. As a matter of fact, it's probably not even mostly about winning. It's about life. It's about doing your best. It's about beating adversity. It's about doing the right thing, living a life of hard work, hard play, and yes, even hard prayer. This is a life worthy of a human being. It is a life of dignity and a life of honor, which is a life that I think that Coach Kelly lived. He grew up in Boys Town, an orphanage in New York City. I'm quite certain that that was not an easy life, and I suppose that he could have used those humble origins as an excuse not to strive for all the greatness that he was able to achieve. But Coach was not a man with excuses. He was a man with talent, perseverance, and last but not least, a man of faith. And there are times when faith can take us much farther than talent can. And I think that we really need to remember that. I once had a teacher who told me that nothing was more common than a lazy genius or a completely gifted person who was quite honestly a bit of a loser. And I tried to take that to heart. It certainly takes more than talent. It takes faith. It seems to me that a key element of a coach, or any good teacher for that matter, is to see in a student, or swimmer for that matter, something that he cannot see in himself. And this This is what faith is. Faith means to see what cannot be seen by normal means. And what we call love is making the sacrifice to actually give life to that hidden gift in which we place our faith. Coach had both, and he did both. Please allow me to make just a few connections. You've heard me say the word serve a number of times. That is not accidental. This is precisely the kind of life that Jesus Christ came to this earth to live. A life lived for the sake of others and not for the sake of himself. This seems to me to be the kind of life that Coach lived, a life of service, a life lived not just for his own sake, but for the sake of others. And one of the main reasons why I think all of us are here is because of that fact. A life of service is a truly Christian life. And one doesn't have to preach from the pulpit like this one to be a true Christian, but rather a life lived in sacrifice for the sake of others is the greatest pulpit of all, and the greatest and the loudest, really. And in that sense, I think that Coach was a very good and very loud preacher indeed. I will make a bold statement here that I want you to think about closely, and I think that Coach would agree with me. If you are not somehow living a life that places itself at the service of others in some way, shape, or form, however humble, then you are not truly living a Christian life. As a matter of fact, you might really not be living a life fit for a decent human being. Animals live lives for the sake of themselves alone, and even they're capable of showing affection for those in their family. We're called to a life of sacrifice. We're called to a life that looks somewhat like that. I mean, have you ever wondered what God's will is for your life? I'd have a suggestion, if you're willing to take it. Find out what comes fairly easily to you. Find out that those things that people call your gifts and your talents. And then use those to serve your brothers and your sisters, whether spiritually, physically, or emotionally. And you will not fail to be doing the will of God. And I remember when I was first ordained 12 years ago, I was full of zeal about, what I was going to do for God. What am I going to do for God? And fairly recently, the last few years, I began to think that that was perhaps good and well-intentioned, but not very intelligent. Because what can I do for God? What do I have that God does not have? The only thing that I have that he will not take from me is my own heart. And this, I believe, Coach Kelly gave to his God. One thing that I can be certain of is that my brothers and sisters surrounding me certainly do need help. So it would absolutely be God's will that I use my gifts and assist them. And I think that we're here to attest to a man who did precisely that. The family and I chose the gospel about the bread of life for a reason. First of all, Coach strongly believed in the power of the Eucharist, the fact that Jesus came and offered at the end of his life what we would call the new Passover, which made it possible for us to consume his body and his blood. As Catholics, this is what we believe, and there are some other faiths that share this similarly with us. I mean, he said so in John chapter 6, repeating himself several times, as you just heard Deacon Warren mention, that unless you eat his body and drink his blood, there is no life in you. At the end of his life, at the Last Supper, he said, "This is my body, which will be given up for you." I mean, Jesus knew that his disciples had a hard time accepting this teaching, and they even told him so. It's not an easy thing to believe. This is a hard saying, they said. Who can accept it? And Jesus, despite this, stuck to his guns while most of his disciples turned around and left him, which is the only place in Scripture where a mass amount of people reject Jesus about a point of his teaching, and it is specifically about the Eucharist. And interestingly enough, the exact verse where people fall away is John 6, verse 66. But the other reason that we chose this gospel is that Coach was a man accustomed to telling the truth, like the Lord, whether you liked it or not. If you didn't like it, well, then you could fall on your face or you could walk away, but you might not be able to keep company with Coach anymore. That was just the way it was. Jesus was no different. Follow me or don't follow me. Listen to me or don't listen to me. Do what is necessary or do not, but don't do it halfway. And yes, you can fall and you can fail, but if you do, then learn from your mistakes and get back up again. Does this sound familiar to anyone who knows Coach Kelly? And how well do you know Jesus? Because I don't think that he sounds terribly different. Jesus was also a teacher, or dare I say, even a coach. I wonder if we've ever looked at him that way. I would be willing to bet that he did, as he came to this church and prayed. And to be a good swimmer, a good student, a good athlete, it takes following a certain code. It takes a certain amount of sacrifice. It takes dedication. It takes a lot of failures and perseverance. It actually takes giving up some good things that might come our way, but instead we want this one thing so bad that we are willing to sacrifice to get this other thing that we really want. And how have some of us gotten it into our heads that being a good Christian, or even a good person for that matter, takes any less effort than that? Should we dare think that swimming or winning some sort of record takes a tremendous amount of effort, but that being a good Christian takes less than that? I mean, this life is going to end, my friends. It's something that sometimes makes me shudder, at least fills me with wonder, and sometimes even some longing. Every single one of us will be in the place where Coach Kelly is now. We gather together today to celebrate a man who looks like he was pretty well prepared for it, as well as we can be. There's no doubt that he made his mistakes. We all do. Possibly even hurt or offended some people in this church. If that's true, then remember that today is a day to forgive. It's a day to start over. It's a day to say a prayer for Coach, and maybe even very soon to ask him for a prayer for us. I wonder how ready I will be for that final swim across the river that divides this life from the next. I wonder how ready you will be. I mean, today is a day to ask such questions. It is an appropriate day to think of such things. And what's more, I think that Coach would want us to ask those things. Perhaps one final lesson: how to swim from this life to the next. A final coaching session. And really, the only one that truly matters. So, Coach, your friends and your family will miss you. May God bless you and may the angels come and carry you home. Amen.
Republic, Los Caimanes del Caribe. I wrote something in Spanish, and I'll try to translate the best I can. Everything began 41 years ago when I was 13. In a little country called Dominican Republic, my 5 brothers and myself, and a lot of other kids from other nationalities, we began an adventure that would change our lives forever. In the age that you turn from exploring as a child the outside world, and then you began to look inside and try to understand what your life is going to be about. At that time, we had Colonel Kelly appeared in our lives. This is not about swimming, he used to say. At that time, when he was trying to make us go over our fears and to discover our talents and enhance our horizons and look at ourselves from other perspective, because he made us feel important. When he expected something from ourselves, instantly we thought we would be able to do it, because he was the chief and he knew everything, so we could not let him down. So we tried our best not to fail on him. When 40 years ago there was no competitive swimming in the Dominican Republic, there were no pools for competitions. Particularly myself, I've never seen anybody swimming a butterfly. When the Caimanes del Caribe was founded, it was a revolution. None of my friends in the school, believe me that we practiced in the early hours of the morning 6 days a week. And in the school, while playing and sweating, I always smelled like chlorine. The other girls would look at me like, oh my God, this freak. But at the same time, he taught all the parents to take times to be judges, swimming judges. He made able to our club have competitions for the first time in the country. He taught other trainers, and we invited other countries to our country, and we traveled all around the Caribbean. We didn't have a pool, we didn't have a club, but we did have a plane, because in the plane that we chartered, the pilot was so proud of us that he put our name in the plane, and we used to brag about that. Everything that Colonel Kelly did was taking it from his time, the time of his family and his wife. So Mary Lou, his eternal companion, was very important for us too, because without her backing him up, he wouldn't have been able to give all he gave to us. We only had 4 years with him, but for us, it was the most important years of our life. That, in our adult years, he gave us the best tool one can have. We keep constantly asking ourselves, is this the best I can do? Are you sure that you can go a little further? We keep looking at our lives to keep the standards of excellence he taught us. On behalf of his frail health, he wanted to go to the Dominican Republic to see us. That for us is his last act of love to to our team, to all of us, all of Los Caimanes. It always, everything that is about him made a big fuss. So it made people that who didn't see for like 20, 30 years to get in touch and make plans. Everything, we were going to see him on next weekend. So, even though he's gone, we are nearer because of him and because he was going to make the effort and the sacrifice to see us. Then we have to honor him with our lives, keeping in mind that he loved us until the last moment. I came here just to let you know that everything that there is about swimming in Dominican Republic was begun by him. But I'm here also to tell the Kellys that in all of us, in our country they have a home, and in all of us they have a family too, because he lives in all of us and they are part of him. So I am very honored to be here today. So thanks.
I'd like to ask Mark Pennington to come forward. He is the president of the Hurricane Swim Club.
Former president. It's always sad when we lose someone important to us. As I tried to collect my thoughts on what I would say today, I thought how different and difficult it will be not to have Coach on the deck. I will not be able to benefit from his years of experience and his wisdom anymore. Then I thought, that's really not true. We will continue to reap the benefit of having had him in our lives. We'll see it every time a swimmer steps on the blocks. We'll see it every time a parent stands at the edge of the pool and cheers their child on. We'll see it when we watch the other coaches pacing the deck doing what they do. We'll see his influence for years to come. As these swimmers today, the 9, 10, 12, 15, 18-year-olds, become productive, well-grounded adults with a strong work ethic and the ability and desire to set lofty goals for themselves. His mark is on our children. We definitely see it today as his current swimmers attend college, some on a full scholarship, some on partial athletic scholarships, some swimming simply for the love of the sport that he instilled in them. We see it with multiple generations of former swimmers on which he's had such a positive influence. While he won't be there on deck with us anymore, his legacy and influence certainly live on and will continue for many, many years to come. I knew Coach for about 12 years. I knew of him for a few more than that. About 12 years ago, we, as a swimming family, had a choice to make. My son Adam had to either stop swimming competitively or we had to go swim for Coach Ed Kelly and the Hurricanes. He didn't want to stop swimming, but having seen Coach on deck at swim meets, riding herd on his swimmers, barking sets and intervals, very much the drill sergeant, he had heard of and believed the old being coach routine, and he didn't really want any part of it. Thank goodness his desire to swim was strong, and he decided to give the Hurricanes a try. Because if he hadn't, all of us would have missed out on knowing the most fascinating, caring man you could ever know. Everybody here today knows the real Ed Kelly. He was a whole lot of bark and very little bite. Adam got to swim for Coach for 8 years, my other son Eric for 10, and Amy for a little longer than that. I'm thankful that God brought him into our lives. He was an incredible role model for my children and countless others who will all reap the benefits of having known him for the rest of their lives. At times when they least expect it, his training, the mental and the moral, if not the physical, will kick in as they make important life decisions. Coach Kelly and the Hurricanes and Coach Kelly, they're really interchangeable terms. You can't think about one without immediately thinking of the other. His dedication and devotion to his team was absolute. His team was the swimmers. And their parents and their grandparents, and for that matter, anybody else that was even remotely connected to one of his swimmers. All were part of the Hurricane family. That's what made the team a team in his eyes. Everybody was a part of the Hurricanes, and everybody was expected to be the best you could be. His dedication to his team, his swimmers, and the team's motto never wavered, not once, not ever. A couple years ago, sorry, when I was on the Hurricane board, Ed was in the hospital, and I went to see him. Sean and Mike were there, visiting with him at the time, and when I walked in the room, Coach immediately ran them out, both of them. He had Hurricane business to attend to, and the little thing like being in the hospital wasn't going to get in his way of doing it. And I was embarrassed. Sean had just come in from overseas a few days before. Mike had gotten there like an hour and a half before from out of town. And here I am talking Hurricane business with Ed, and they're in the hall. When he finally dismissed me, and with Ed, he decided when any given conversation was over, not you. I went out and found Sean and Mike to let them know that Ed wanted them back in the room. And I apologized to them for interrupting their visit. And both of them just waved off with the, "That's just Dad." I guess you get used to sharing your father with others when he's been so giving all of his life. And I want to thank all his family for sharing him with us for all these years. I spent a good deal of time with Ed over the last few years. Many board meetings, swim meets, practices, and just visiting at his home. All valued hours to me. I am blessed to have been able to share with him. A while back, he and I drove a van full of swimmers to Texas A&M for a sectional meet. 10 hours of driving each way. And in all that time, I could never get him to tell me what his rank was while he was in the service. He'd talk for a minute about one assignment or another in some far-off little exotic locale. And he'd give me that little grin, and he'd just stop talking and said, "I can't tell you anymore." He really didn't like talking about himself all that much. He preferred to talk about his swimmers, their challenges and successes, and the team. He was always so proud of them. He was a private man. He was not one to take accolades he so richly deserved. He'd much rather give credit to his swimmers or parents, but mostly his swimmers. He was being interviewed after the North Shore girls team had won the third state title in a row. The reporter asked him, "How'd you do it? How do you win 3 state championships in a row?" He said, "I didn't do it, they did it." I didn't learn his rank until I read it in the paper on Tuesday. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Joseph Kelly. Seems fitting to me. I'm not always surprised he rose to such a lofty rank, although I'd bet money on drill sergeant. Edward Joseph Kelly, husband of Mary Lou for 57 years, father of Michael, Kathleen, Sean, Patrick, and Colleen, grandfather of 10, grandfather figure to an untold number of swimmers over the years. As a soldier, coach, and a friend, he was the best.
I'm going to do my best to make it through this. I'm Patrick, his youngest son. What I wanted to do was to share a few stories, personal stories. I remember my father telling me. My father was born in New York in 1930. Of course, he was raised in a Catholic orphanage in Boys Town. And as many of you know, the orphanage was run by nuns. And the nuns were wonderful. Of course, they could be quite strict. And I remember my father telling me stories about how they would get out of line, and he'd get whacked on the knuckles a few times, and buddy, that would straighten him out right away. He also, throughout his life, many of you don't know this, but he despised oatmeal for the longest time. He despised oatmeal because That's what he was forced to eat for breakfast every morning. The orphanage was actually on a farm, and they raised their own crops, but of course to sustain the orphanage, they had to sell a lot of it. My father could have a bit of a mischievous side. Many of you probably don't know that, but he would say, you wouldn't believe how fast we could go to the hen house and steal an egg and cook an egg before the nuns could catch us. Despite all the difficulties that he had, he, of course, stayed in the at Boys Town, and perhaps by choice. He was never adopted. He did grow up and excel in sports. He excelled in many sports, including baseball and also football, which he, of course, played in college. Many of you may not know this, but during his high school years, he actually played baseball against the likes of Phil Rizzuto and Yogi Berra. Of course, Yogi Berra, the great Yogi Berra, was a 13-time World Series champion, both as a player and as manager. He once told me a story that he was out, I suppose, at a meet or something like that, and he was with a group of people, and he happened to see Yogi Berra. And he looked at the rest of the people in the group, and he said, look, I'm going to go over there and talk to him. And they're like, what do you mean? You don't know him. He actually went up to him. Yogi recognized him. They talked, and they, of course, fondly reminisced together. My father even played football in college, and he actually bowled at 299, which is pretty impressive. The interesting thing is he was never a swimmer, which is really quite ironic since he devoted so much of his life to that endeavor. After completing college, of course, he enrolled in the Army, and we've heard about that, and he did several tours in Vietnam, in Korea, and then in Vietnam, and served his country very dutifully. I think his loyalty and his faith and his devotion were really quite unparalleled, and I don't think that's any more apparent than with his swimmers. I think he gave his heart and his soul to them. I just can't even fathom myself how many hundreds or thousands of lives he helped shape, or how many wayward kids he set straight, or how many kids he gave meaning and purpose to their lives. His influence, I think, could be felt all the way from the beaches of the Dominican Republic to the shores and swamps of Louisiana. On a more personal note, my dad was just a good man. He was my hero growing up. I remember writing an essay about heroes, and my father was my hero. I wrote about. I'll never forget the time, and maybe Diana remembers this, that we were at a swim meet, and my father was actually challenged to swim by another coach. I think the coach was jealous. My father was never a swimmer. This coach was much younger, and of course he was a swimmer. My father knew going into the race that he wouldn't win it, but he was very gracious, and he took up the challenge, and he swam the race, and he, of course, promptly lost it. Personally, I was devastated. He was fine. I was devastated. I was devastated because he was my hero and he lost. I really can't express all the wonderful things that my father taught me, and I know taught so many other people, but I'll try. He taught me the meaning of hard work and self-reliance. He showed me what it takes to accomplish any goal that I might set in front of me. He taught me to be a great husband and father, that I should be loyal, faithful, serve as a role model, and always take care of and protect my family. Jim Valvano, we're from North Carolina, so we're big basketball fans, but Jim Valvano, the North Carolina State basketball coach who won the national championship, once said, "My father gave me the greatest gift anyone could give another person. He believed in me." And I felt my father believed in me, whether it was in school, swimming, becoming a doctor, or marrying and having a family. And I want to end by saying, just quickly, my favorite Irish blessing. For my father, may the road rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
Thanks everybody for coming. Clearly there's several themes that sort of keep flowing, and I think that's a good thing. Because few things in the world are more powerful than a positive push. A smile, a word of encouragement, an expression of hope, a hand to get you back up after you've been knocked down. You can do it when things get tough. My father was really good at those things. And as you heard earlier, as Paul wrote in 2 Timothy, my dad fought the good fight. He finished the race, and he kept the faith. As you've heard, he had the most humble of upbringings. He grew up in the orphanage for boys, and I think that upbringing, along with his innate spirit, molded him into the person that he could be. You know, God works in mysterious ways and uses everything for good. At the time, you look back and say, what a tragedy. Here's a man born, raised in an orphanage. If only we could see the next step. Look what it led to, a life of leading youth, inspiring youth. And I think that upbringing in the orphanage and his innate spirit is what led him down that path. He joined the military, as you've heard, quickly moved up the ranks, served in Korea and Vietnam, commanded troops. He was in the jungle in the thick of battle, and I can't imagine the horrors that he experienced. But I remember as a kid, he'd send reel-to-reel tapes. Back in those days, internet probably wasn't a thought in anybody's mind. There was no YouTube, no Skype. It was reel-to-reel tapes on an old reel-to-reel machine. And I remember as a family gathering around and listening to those tapes to hear his voice. And it always amazed me how he could keep those worlds separate. Here he was recording that in the middle of this devastation, yet the loving messages he would send to his family on those little reel-to-reel tapes. He welcomed my wife, Galen, from the first day we met her over 37 years ago into the family and treated her like a daughter. And for that, I'll always be grateful. But make no mistake, my father was a man's man, and he definitely had ideas about how to raise children. You think it was tough being a swimmer? Try being a firstborn son. One Christmas after our first child, Eric, their first grandchild, was born, we'd gone for Christmas, and he asked a typical grandfather sort of question. You know, what would you like for Christmas? I'm sure expecting a toy gun or whatever he was expecting. And the response he got was a dollhouse. He got that look. You know the look. He got that look on his face, and he shot a quick glance at me, which clearly said, "What's wrong with you?" Took a deep breath and promptly asked a second question, which was meant as a softball. You know, here's one that will sort of make this whole thing go away and get smoothed over. The most benign of questions: what's your favorite color? Garrett looked him in the eye and promptly responded, pink. Well, I thought I was going to get dragged outside at that point. I feared for my safety. But one of his gifts was an undying belief that those he came in contact with could excel, as most of you have experienced. And that's usually all most of us need, really, is somebody to believe in us even when we don't believe in ourselves. And it's amazing when we get that push and that affirmation and we can just turn that corner, what that propels us to be able to accomplish. If you just stick with someone and don't give up on them, it's amazing that they start to believe in themselves and the potential they can reach. You heard Diana mention we were stationed in the Dominican Republic. He started the first swimming team in the country. And as she mentioned, this was not just about recruiting swimmers, literally sending notes to the school saying, is anybody interested in swimming? But this was a startup operation for those business folks out there. This was no trainers, no judges, nobody had any clue what to do. But like any other challenge he faced, he looked at it, shrugged it off, and said, not a problem, and proceeded to, in fact, make it happen. His ability to push us, to prod us, to make us do our best, to stretch us, whether physically or emotionally, is sustaining. And I think that's important. It's sustaining. It helps us not just in the moment or the immediate situation we find ourselves in, but rather it's a gift that serves us over and over again as we try to figure out this thing called life. So many people have commented that my father's belief in them changed not only the course of their lives, but the lives of their children and families. What a testimony, what a legacy. He was one of the most unselfish men I've ever met, constantly giving and serving others, even when it would have been far easier to say no. And I know there were many weddings and other events that he attended. For many of you here today, where he had to travel out of state or otherwise sacrifice. But he always found a way to do it. And when he first got ill several years ago, I remember him in the hospital, and Dr. Seflin, his daughter, Sarah Seflin, was getting married. It was a Wednesday afternoon. He's in the ICU, had just had a major procedure, tubes and wires coming out of everywhere. And he looked at the surgeon who was here this morning, Dr. Gray, and said, "I'm going to the wedding Saturday." Well, of course, a lot of laughter, and "Sure you are, coach," and, not a problem. And I can tell you, you can imagine the laughter. But when my father didn't do a lot of dancing that Saturday night, he spent most of it sitting in a chair. He was there, just like he said he'd be. He was a man of his word. He gave unselfishly to many charities and worthy causes, never mentioning it to anyone, never making a big deal out of it. And you know how many charities will give you a self-addressed little sticky stamp to thank you? I can tell you that there's enough of those in the house to throw a ticker tape parade down Gauze Boulevard for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. One thing that children and teenagers can spot a mile away is hypocrisy. The old "do as I say, not as I do" problem. They didn't see that with my father. As he pushed those around him to do their best, to work hard, to do the right thing, he was living those same principles himself. I think many swimmers probably found it hard to complain if they were tired or didn't feel like practice when my father was there, ready to go at the pool, 65 years their senior, after 4 hours of dialysis. My brothers and sisters and I tried over the years to get my father to slow down, and as Mark mentioned, he quickly shut that conversation down. Thank goodness my father was right, we were wrong, and he didn't take our advice. So very few people touch so many in such a profound way, and my father's personality just seemed to transcend gender, age, culture, nationality. He had an extraordinary ability to connect with people, no matter their background or circumstance. And because of that, we can only imagine the ripple he's caused, and what a celebration it's going to be in heaven, as he celebrates now with my mother and those that preceded him. I'll leave you with one final story. When I was about 6 years old, we were stationed in Panama. And I remember we went to the beach, and there was a sandbar several hundred yards out. And I remember telling my father how I wanted to swim out to the sandbar. But I didn't think I could make it, so long way to go for a 6-year-old. He told me to put on my mask and snorkel and fins and give it a try. I might just surprise myself. Well, we took off swimming, and of course, at 6 in the ocean, I tired pretty quickly. And as he noticed that I was getting tired, he didn't even say a word, he just sort of motioned for me to get on his back. I put my arms around him, and he swam and worked his way out to the sandbar, pushing me forward, getting me where I wanted to go when I couldn't do it on my own. Little did I know that he would go on to do that for thousands of other swimmers and people around him for the next 47 years. You see, my father had very broad shoulders. He wasn't afraid to take on more and more burden to help those around him. He carried me and Kathy and Sean and Patrick and Colleen and so many others, never shrugging anyone off, even as his health would be challenged. It may have bent him over a little bit, more than it would have in his younger days. But he bore the weight. He bore the weight. I'm forever grateful for the example he set for me, for my 4 sons, Garrett, Ian, Brennan, and Grant, on how to be a man, how you should always do the right thing, how to live a life worth living, and how to do your best at whatever you're attempting. There truly are very few role models in this world. You don't find them in Hollywood. You don't find them in pop music. You don't find them on TV. How lucky, privileged, and blessed are we to have had a father, a grandfather, a coach in the Dominican Republic, and right here in good old Slidell, who was truly a role model and a mentor in our lives. Thanks.